Are you a business owner stuck in fear, doubt, and worry about what the marketplace will look like in the future? Then this show is for you. Strap on your seatbelt and get ready to disrupt and innovate. Here's your host, Lisa Levy.
Welcome to another exciting episode of Disrupt and Innovate, the podcast that dives deep into the world of groundbreaking business leaders. Today, we have a special guest joining us, Justin Gray. With a remarkable track record as a 5-time entrepreneur and a keen interest in venture capital, Justin is a force to be reckoned with in the world of business. As the CCO of Shift Paradigm and agency Rollup, Justin has taken businesses from humble beginnings to revenue milestones. But his experience doesn't stop there. He's also a respected angel investor and limited partner at Stage 2 Capital. To further diversify his endeavors, Justin and his father own and operate a 130-acre USDA certified organic hemp farm in rural Missouri, pioneering the resurgence of hemp, as in the new cotton, and one of the only certified organic hemp field growers to focus on the CBG cannabinoid, the genetic cannabis strain that has numerous health benefits. Beyond his personal achievements, Justin has also made a mark in the world of writing. Starting with almost no personal brand or platform, he's become a recognized speaker and published author. In 2017, he launched his column Tribal Leadership in Inc. magazine. With all of this in mind, we're excited to dive into this conversation. Justin is a true force to be reckoned with, and welcome to our conversation today, Justin.
Lisa, thanks for having me.
I am so excited to see where we're going to go with this conversation today. So I have all this content to build you up, but it's really not as interesting for the listeners or the viewers to hear me talk about you. Can you tell us your story? What was your journey? How did you get to where you are today, and what's driving you forward?
Yeah, with all that buildup, I'll start by tearing myself down. So this story I was thinking about in terms of journey, is getting longer as I get older here. So I think the most important thing to understand and realize is, it's very interesting that I'm kind of sitting in this chair and at the place that I'm at this point, because I went to school at an in-state school, nothing special, graduated with a literal ton of debt and credit card debt, and then went to work at really boring jobs. I graduated with a degree in marketing, got a number of marketing jobs, thought that was just going to be my life going forward, and was fortunate enough through a series of kind of mishaps and luck to get a job at an early startup, which was a totally new world for me. And that's when I kind of found where I felt like my life wanted to go, or what I really kind of gravitated towards. And so helped build that business, which was a payment technology startup in the SaaS space, from almost no revenue to about $250 million worth of ARR. Eventually acquired a piece of sweat equity in that business, had an exit, and then ultimately started, as you mentioned, a host of my own businesses. Sold the most recent in February of 21 to private equity, which was an agency called LeadMD, which ultimately became Shift Paradigm as a part of a roll-up. And then recently kind of took my investing footprint and formalized it by opening our own venture capital firm. So that's a very abbreviated version of that journey. But as I said, I would not have predicted this if we were sitting here 20 years ago.
Well, I think that's the joy of our journey. Whatever we thought we were going to do 20 years ago is a guarantee that we're not doing that Certainly. Today. Right. And that's the fun. So with all of this, marketing obviously is your formal background. I want to dig just a little bit into you and your father.
Sure.
Right. It is.
Do I need to lay on the couch for this?
No, please. We're not going to go that. We're not going that direction. No. But growing hemp in the US, right, has had a long history of lots of misinformation, lots of big control that prevented it from being a crop. And yet it is really an important one. And it's a very different business from everything else that you're doing. And the innovations, the disruption and innovation that come from that are interesting to me. So Can we play in that space a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
How did you decide to go down that path?
Well, before that, this is land that's been in my family for a long period of time. When the construction, industry kind of fell out, which is my family's history, and my father's actually an entrepreneur in that space, has been for a long time. In '08, kind of right out that storm, we converted that land to organic. And so we had, field crops as well as what's called a high tunnel, which is kind of like a big greenhouse where we did primarily, traditional field crops, wheat, corn, soy, and then we grow like leafy greens and vegetables within the high tunnel. And then when kind of, marijuana and hemp started to kind of get this resurgence and states started changing those regulations, we were keeping an eye on that, obviously on the hemp side. But when Missouri legalized the growing of hemp and all those kind of variants, you get, CBD, which is kind of the most popular, but CBG is very similar. It actually has a lower THC count or a lower propensity to have the same THC ratio. So it's a bit of a safer grow, but has actually more benefits than CBD. So that's why we chose that strain. And basically it was just something, fun to learn about and do. It's very much the Wild West. And so it's definitely been a lot of learning experiences there. Everything from growing, the crop itself to hiring an entirely new contingent of workers in rural Missouri, which is nothing to shake a stick at. And so it's just been a really fun journey, actually.
And so in that story you shared, right, you come from an entrepreneurial background. So I'm just going to pull these random threads because
Sure.
it paints an interesting picture. So your dad is also an entrepreneur. You went to college, studied marketing, and did not expect to become an entrepreneur. Is there a reason why you didn't think you were going to follow that path?
I don't think so. I think it's just, you get these traditional thoughts of like, you go to school, you get a job, right? Like that whole security type of a deal. And I think most likely the primary reason was there was nothing that I was that passionate about at the time. I like to write. I started off being a journalism major, pivoted into marketing, but I was, very much kind of on an autopilot is what I would describe it as, until something came along where I was like, oh, wow, this is, something where I feel like this is what I've been looking for or waiting for. So kind of, fortunately stumbled upon that. And I'm certainly glad I did.
I love that. So from my perspective, my father was a real estate developer. I guess he still is. He's just sort of retired. But right, that real estate market, there's the ups and the downs, and they're pretty big swings. And so I very specifically was not going to be an entrepreneur. I didn't necessarily even know what that word was, but I wanted a corporate job. I wanted, a 401k, vacation time, all of those things that provide security. And then there was a moment in life where that all changed. And I realized that that sense of security is an illusion. Mm-hmm. It may have existed a generation ahead of us where people actually spent 25, 30 years in a company and retired with a pension that actually sustained them. But for me, there was a moment where I went, oh, this doesn't actually exist. There are different choices to be made. You've made that choice over 5 times. Being a serial entrepreneur and being an entrepreneur, it's like level 1, and then there's level 2, right? You are running and gunning to make change happen. What are the things that get you interested in the next opportunity?
Well, first, I think it's interesting that you mentioned, that like stability, because I think people who have entrepreneurial parents, like, I don't know if yours was similar, but like my parents always told me, like, go get a steady, corporate, job that has a steady income. And obviously that's coming from, the element of that they're experiencing that is anything but it was funny to me because I love those swings inherently. And I think the reason I've leaned into entrepreneurship is that leads to me being what I call unemployable. Like I like to do everything. I don't like to stay in a certain lane. And so largely, like when I have had, formal jobs and things of that nature, people don't like folks that like kind of go out of their lane and, they kind of want to play in all the different areas. And so that is certainly my challenge. I think anything, even, the thing I was exposed to was really startup business, right? Like not even marketing or go to market, but like all these different elements where you don't have that like box that you have to stay within, and people are just open to, hey, who knows how to fix this problem? I mean, that's largely what excites me and normally leads to whatever business I've chosen to get into, is just seeing something that is broken, or there's a demand or a desire, and the ability to kind of like start all the necessities around a business from scratch. Like, I love that stage. And that's, also why we're starting with, or why we invest in seed stage companies, because that is that like hyper growth, all hands on deck, everyone kind of do a little bit of everything aspect that I'm really attracted to. But the reason, we got into this space was, and we mentioned I've done some like angel and I'm an LP in several funds. And what I've seen over and over again is that with capital allocation, like we're not giving founders and startups like the real resources that they need, which is just like these really fundamental things of experience and just operator horsepower, right? Like, it's like, we'll give you this money, you've got to go hire, great people. They better be the right people right out of the gate. You better know everything about what you should be doing. You should be able to run a sales funnel. You should be able to manage clients. You should be able to, come up with the right operating model and the right, business economics and things of that nature. And that's just a lot to saddle, on someone. So, you asked like, how do you identify these things? Like, that's just something that I've seen, right? Like, sitting on the other side of the table, running an agency, helping these businesses, seeing what they're up against. And then also as an investor, like, what resources do investors and VCs and PEs like provide to their portfolio companies? And there's just a big disconnect between that, because you think all these well-funded organizations should have a playbook. They should have things figured out. And I've sat on the other side, like as their consultant, as their provider, and they're looking to you for like, hey, what do we do here? And that was just always a big disconnect to me. Like, you've got, you're a Series B, Series C company. Like, don't you have it figured out at this point? And what I found is like, everyone wants to know what everyone else is doing, which to me says that no, like, there isn't a playbook. Like, these folks don't have all the answers. And so I think bringing those two worlds together is, what led to this current venture.
And I love what you were describing in there. With my coaching and consulting, we work with businesses to get the founder in the visionary role and ensure that the team around them knows how to lead and knows how to make that business operating model work. And I think it's a really important thing that you were discussing, right, is with that role of the founder and that looking forward and what is it going to be. And the fact that the people who have those really brilliant market disrupting ideas, the innovations that are going to just change what's happening in the marketplace, make that real impact to customers, very seldomly are business people. And that's a huge gap that we need to take care of in the industry so that we can nurture the success of that targeted disruption that drives innovation. I think I personally agree. My consultancy plays in that space very specifically. So I think that's a little sweet spot. And that allows, and I think if I'm understanding, right, looking at what that first growth curve looks like, then being able to go into another growth curve keeps that momentum happening so that whether it's in business A or B, right, you're watching those things to keep your foot on the pedal so that we're going in the right direction.
Yeah, you've got to essentially be all things to everyone at that stage of an organization. So you've got to, that's a lot of responsibility. And I find that there just are not a ton of resources available. And people also, obviously have natural barriers to asking for help. I've been a part of, firms that kind of boast as operator capital, and, their LPs are all current and former operators, and that's great. But oftentimes it requires the founder to raise their hand and say, like, I'm having a problem. And I found that, like, oftentimes by the time that hand is raised, a lot of water has flowed into that bridge already. And sometimes it's just really superficial things where you need to get involved in the business. I mean, that's what we do. And when we invest, we actually step into these organizations and help them devise a go-to-market strategy, help them build process, help them, build that operational layer, staff, and so on. And so, that kind of combined offering sets the expectation from day one that, this is more than capital. To your point, there's a lot of skill sets that, again, get saddled on someone that might be a subject matter expert, they might be a visionary, but now you've got to be a head of culture, you've got to be a head of product, you've got to be, a founder-led growth individual where you're selling. So that's a lot of responsibility.
It is. And the odds of a founder being able to play all of those roles successfully is very small. And so, right, building and getting that, and you talked about it earlier, that initial team, those first wave of people around them that can drive through the chaos to actually being operationally ready. And that's a really critical, time in a business's growth journey. And that's where so many fail.
And I've made those mistakes, right? Like I've tried to build teams that look like me, like, that I think every founder at some point says, like, I just need to clone myself. And it's such the wrong thing to do. You know what I mean? Like, it took me a number of years to figure out, like, no, I need people that look distinctly different than I do and have the skill sets that I don't naturally perpetuate and so on. So if you can bring those learnings, again, before the pains of kind of the misstep happen, I think there's just huge value in that.
There absolutely, I think there are. And you talked about having that initial right team, and then we have processes, right? In my words, I describe it as an equation. We take our people plus process, multiply that by technology, and that gives us our growth and scale. So everything starts with the right people with good process, and then we can use technology to elevate, automate, and amplify. But all of those, it starts with those first two things. And I love that in the course of what you've just described, you started with those two things. So it's not just an idea. This is the reality in business, right? Right people, the right work sets the stage for everything. Justin,
and everything these days gets wrapped in culture, right? Like, you have to be able to inspire, with that vision and promote the best in everyone. Like, and how do you do that? Like, you let people fail, you hire for really fundamental traits, and then, you let them run. And I think, again, that's the thing that attracted me to startups and just early growth businesses, is the ability to, like, reach the end of your competence without, a bunch of restraints placed upon you.
Yeah. So one of those secret sauces in that startup phase, the spirit of experimentation, right? Trying things, seeing what happens. We'll use the phrase "fail fast and move on," but really all of that experience is about, and it's an investment in learning. And that's where you're going to be able to find what works, ditch the things that don't, no matter how cool you think they are. And oftentimes they're right. The ideas in our head sound so cool, and they're the ones that don't work. Justin, in that mindset, do you have some experiments that you've done inside of companies that you were growing that just absolutely failed, but that failure led to the next thing? You have a story?
Well, we've certainly had a lot of failures. I think so I mean, we always ran, this is primarily a Lead MD story, which was the longest, organization that I was involved with at just over 11 years. But we always had like a skunkworks division, and it was a formal thing, it kind of evolved in terms of naming, but it was also branded, right? Like, it was this ability where, like, if you were performing at your position, and you showed us that you could, like, take on some side projects and kind of graduate to this, fun kind of playground area, we would staff this, skunkworks team accordingly. And we'd, it was based in a bunch of experiments. So again, like, multiple over the years, but our biggest that we always came back to was learning, right? Like, there is no formal education for marketing, not what it looks like today. Like, you literally cannot go get a demand gen degree. There's a couple of universities that do some, like, summer programs, or, I forget what the name of it is, but they'll bring in adjuncts, and they'll bring in, outside educators to provide some knowledge, but it's not tactical. It's not actually, like, in systems and so on. It's funny to think how much of marketing has become dependent upon the software that we use to do the job. It's probably the only discipline that, like, looks like learning software is also closely tied to the ability to do the job, with creativity, obviously. So we actually spun off an entire organization from the skunkworks project. Like, we built a business which was called 6 Bricks. We built an LMS from the ground up, and it's a really, really cool concept that we ended up commercializing a piece of it, but largely it was a massive failure, like millions of dollars put into this. But, like, it's a really, I mean, I took away a ton of learnings from it. Again, we ended up monetizing a good piece of the content that we created for it. But the challenge in the business is that these things are evolving so quickly. And so what we created was actually an LMS that looks like a flight simulator. When you logged in, it looked like, your marketing automation systems of the day, your Marketos, your Pardots, your Eloquas, so on and so forth. And so, along with kind of traditional learning in terms of like, read this, fill out these multiple choice exams, it was, all right, now go build this. And you would actually navigate within what looked like one of these platforms, and you either did it right or did it wrong. And based on how you performed, you'd have to go back and reconsume learnings, videos, things of that nature. And so I still think it's like one of the most fundamental concepts that needs to be solved for within the realm of marketing. But it's really challenging because these platforms change so quickly. They're highly customized. And so what ultimately came out of that for me as a learning is like, that authoring tool needs to be democratized, which is a totally like different build, and technology is just kind of catching up to where it needs to be to make that happen. But we ended up taking all of the content from that, experiment and monetizing it through the consultancy, to where if you, essentially hired us to implement one of your systems, we would give you this courseware. We charged, depending upon number of learners for it and so on. And it became a pretty decent business line for us. At the same time, it never became what we thought it was going to when we set out. But I mean, it was a fundamental learning. It provided a lot of opportunity for folks that were working within that business. And I think it still is a great business idea.
In that story, right, you set it up as something that was a complete failure. And yet in that you had learnings that you were able to monetize and salvage from that. So for our audience listening, right, we in American culture have a fear of failure. Mm-hmm. It is something that is bred into us somewhere along the line in our childhood, that it's kind of all or nothing, win or lose. But the reality is we learn more from our failures than we do from getting everything right the first time. And we need to embrace that. So something that you've just championed as a tremendous failure on your behalf, you also took away and leveraged that in ways that you weren't expecting, but ways that were valuable to the business.
Well, the thing that I don't think is ingrained within, you mentioned childhoods and just kind of the path to being an adult and a professional is the relationship side of things. Like anything that I've ever failed at, the yield has come in the form of relationships far more than whatever I thought the product or the service or whatever was being created was ever going to yield. So I think that's something that is just, fundamental. It's also something that we build into kind of our thesis as a VC firm. But the power of relationships, the power of partnership, like what you'll take away from just the connections that you make along the way, obviously, if you're doing things in the right way, is, I think, not only offsets that risk of failure, but I mean, makes almost anything worth experimenting.
And I love that we'll end on that note, right? In that thought space, that it's worth the risk of experimenting, because what you get out of it is so valuable, even when it's not what you expected. Or maybe even especially when it's not what you expected.
Agreed.
Justin, looking forward, looking into the future in terms of opportunities and things that are on the horizon in the business space, where do you see that there are things that our listeners, our viewers should be looking at in terms of opportunities where things are going to be, there are disruptions on the horizon, opportunities for innovation? What is it that you, in the upcoming year to two, what are you trying to influence?
God, there's so many of them. So I think, like as a firm, like we love vertical SaaS, meaning like software that's built specifically for an industry pain. I would say the industries that we're looking at most closely, like certainly healthcare, certainly construction. I think AI is obviously a huge potential out there, but the data behind AI is really going to become the value there. I think the spaces that need the most innovation are certainly customer success, like that entire aspect of SaaS software, I think has just been limping along for so long and needs a complete overhaul in terms of how we think about, relationships with customers, health of customers, the whole kind of red, yellow, green nonsense just needs to kind of be shipped out in terms of software usage conveying to health of a customer. I think, I'll beat the old drum of marketing. Like if you look at what's happening out there in terms of like outbound and inbound, like largely those two channels are failing on the whole. And the technology behind them is still the same stuff that we were using over a decade ago, right? Like the whole batch and blast, the whole email nurture, like email is the primary vertical, I think is, ripe for disruption, and everyone's been acquired at this point. And so it's kind of this vacuum of opportunity. And then, sales equally. I'm really curious as to what's going to come out of like all these widget, sales assistants and so on, because again, the data from that is really, if you can start to predict, so two things here, I'm getting off track, but on the sales side, like if you can start to predict what messages truly engage, what really moves someone through a sales funnel, that's going to be the value that comes off all that superficial, like, hey, I'll write your email message for you, or I'll come up with a script over the phone. I think that is a huge area of opportunity. Last one, the entire RevOps space that we've created around like hiring people to run, and plug in these different softwares to one another, and just to get a campaign out the door and so on. Like there's a huge AI potential in that world as well, just in what is the next best step, not what can be done, but what should we really do based on who that buyer is, how they engaged, what they've consumed, what else they're consuming out in the world that's not on our properties. There's so much opportunity out there. Like this stuff is what my mind does all day long.
Well, in all of that, right, I heard a theme that there's a lot of technology that we're leveraging that's old, and the processes around it that are old. And considering the amount of actual cultural disruption we've experienced over the last 3 years, it's actually kind of funny to stop and think back on the fact that those tool sets are truly a decade old, and they aren't serving our needs well, and they aren't making authentic relationships start. And I am intrigued as well as you are with the idea of where is AI going to play in all of this, because it's a first step into building a relationship, but right, the person to person is still what's going to actually close deals, build lasting relationships, and create lifetime value.
Yeah, and I think that's why you see this kind of like swing of the pendulum back to relationships and kind of this whole near bound and partner ecosystem movement, because at the end of the day, that's what's closing deals right now, right? Like that's what's expanding within existing clients. That's what's actually leading people into opening doors. No one's filling out a form and saying, call me, I'm ready to buy your solution, right? Like, and so you see that return to fundamentals. And to your point, how do we tech enable that in a way that keeps that authenticity? That's a really interesting question to solve for.
It is. And I think we're going to have fun over the next couple of years watching some epic failures on that front.
That's true.
Right. And we will all learn from all of those. Justin, thank you for sharing your time with us and all of these different insights. Will you take a moment and share with our audience how people can find out more about you?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm, very active on LinkedIn. You can search my profile there. Our website, inrevenue.capital, or you can use .com as well, inrevenue.com. And yeah, I'm fairly ubiquitous there. Our podcast is The Cheat Code. It's available right on the website. Please subscribe to that if you're interested, and happy to connect.
Fabulous. We had a great conversation today. For the audience, you know the rules. Don't get left behind. Join me next time.
That's it for today's episode of Disrupt and Innovate. Head over to iTunes and subscribe to the show. Every single week, one lucky listener that posts a review on iTunes will win the grand prize drawing, a $15,000 private VIP day with Lisa Levy. And be sure to head over to disruptandinnovate.com and get your free copy of Lisa's gift, and join us on our next episode.